Hello, encouragers. I'm Rebecca Scott, wife, mother of 4, author, and owner and designer of Rebecca Scott Designs. I'm here to encourage you, to make you feel the I can do this spirit each and every day of our awesome journeys to fulfill those many important roles. I believe we are fully equipped to execute, and I will provide you with as much knowledge and practices and systems as I can to help you understand just what I know you can do. Execute. We got this. Encouragers, on today's podcast, it may not be the sexiest title, but it is clearly the wisest title you will probably read in all of the 160 episodes that I've recorded. I've recruited my good friend Clint Brown, which you've heard on the podcast frequently, to help us break down what 7 reports we must know. And a little background on this is when I've been doing the coaching, and after we come out of a year like 2020, everyone going, okay, I know how to do business different now. I know how to accelerate. I know how to run lean. I know how to do a lot of things. But do you truly know what kind of reports you should be running that perhaps you know the title, you know what an income statement is, but maybe you don't know a little bit more details on why it is important to review these, whether weekly, monthly, or quarterly. And some of these do need to be reviewed weekly. And so Clint's going to kind of help break down why it is that we need to learn it, because if you're anything like me, I'm like, do I really need to know it? But when we get through a year, any year, even a year outside of 2020, we really do need to know this. And for me personally, when I decided to dig into the details, the ones that the bankers always want and the ones that anybody working with you want, then I felt more empowered to make decisions for my company and was able to switch gears when a year like 2020 appears. So without further ado, thank you, Clint, for coming on.
Absolutely. I'm super excited. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, God. Clint's one of my favorite guests because we are friends, obviously, outside of this, but he's always game for, meaty conversations where I'm like, do we really need to? But this was requested by you guys, so you're the perfect one to usher us into this meaty conversation.
Yeah. No, I like this because I think that your listeners are going to go from a place of feeling disempowered to feeling empowered. I think that is, in general, there's several generations of us. I'm 41, so those a little older, those a little younger. They have sort of a general distaste for anything that sounds mathy.
Oh,
right?
Yes,
like they weren't super fond of math in school, or for those of you who are math nerds, this is probably super exciting. But for everybody else, which is the majority, they're like, oh, geez, a Excel sheet with numbers, that may or may not tell me the honesty of my business. Yeah, I think that we'll go from a place of sort of feeling like, oh, gosh, this is something I know I should probably do, but I don't really get it, to a place of getting it. And that excites me. So, And I'm not somebody who wakes up in the morning wanting to run these reports either. So that puts me in the same boat.
Right. But at the same time, yes, I know that you'll emphasize how important they are because they empower you to make the decisions that you do like to make, like what color zipper is going to go on the purse. I mean, really, that's what happens. Read the report, study a little bit, and then get on to what you're really good at, but you do need to know it. So Clint's going to go over 7 different reports, and we're actually going to do part 1 and part 2 of the podcast here. So if you're listening to part 1, make sure that you follow up with part 2 so that he can keep explaining why all of these are important. So the first one, usually the most obvious, is an income statement. Do you think, first of all, I kind of want to do everyone do review this daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly.
Yeah.
So tell us what an income statement is.
Income statement is pretty simple. It's basically your profit and loss, or sometimes people say your P&L. Mm-hmm. And basically it's just like, are you making any money?
Okay.
And most business owners feel like they're making money because money's moving around. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that they're making money. And the time that you probably start to become aware of this is when you go, geez, I've done a lot of sales, but I still have some bills I can't pay, or I'm still not paying myself. Mm. And that's about the time I find that a business owner is eager to look at their P&L or their income statement and sort of try to get it. Because when you're at a hobby business size, maybe you make $800 a month doing something on the side, or maybe it's $8,000 a month doing something on the side. Sometimes there's enough, and you can write yourself a little check, or pay for a family vacation, or pay off your car, and it's sort of all fun and games. But then when you get a little bit bigger, it starts to get a little more serious, and you do kind of have to do it well. And then it starts to matter, like, am I making any money at this? And so this is the sheet that says, are you making any money? which I find is pretty important in business because that's one of the goals of business is to make money.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you review this income statement? Where do you pull it from, and how often do you review it?
Yeah. If you're just doing like some simple math, I have a client that does just like literally has a little spreadsheet they print out or like just a notepad. You could do it that way. Most businesses, once they get going, or they're at the place where their accountant has yelled at them come tax season, they've got QuickBooks or something that allows them to track this. And all of those softwares you could just like literally push button print at any time. And so typically this is reviewed monthly. And so you look at your last month's profit and loss because it includes your expenses, and your expenses don't happen every day. They do typically happen every month, typically. Now, like in your world, Rebecca, sometimes you make seasonal purchases, right? Like you will buy leather in bulk. You don't buy leather every Tuesday. You might buy it once a quarter because it's enough to get a better pricing, or that's when you run out. But typically you look at it on a monthly basis for the past month, which is kind of a long time to wait to see if you're making money. But you do kind of got to get through paying your insurance and your electrical bill or whatever you pay in your business, your employees, for a whole month to see how it washes out.
Okay. And then within the income statement, there are a couple key factors to keep paying attention to. So that's your gross profit, your net profit, your sales, and your COGS. Can you break those down for us?
Yeah, so let's start at the top. Sales. Sales are easy. Just how much money have you made, right? So most business owners are pretty good at this. They keep a tally in their mind, or they keep a tally on a sheet of paper, they keep a tally in software, and it's just like all the money that's come in. And that doesn't matter if you discounted your product or you had a big order. It doesn't matter. Just the total amount. So let's say the total amount in your business, let's just use round numbers, was $1,000, right? So over the month of the prior month, you've made $1,000. Okay, that's your sales, right? Then you had your COGS, or your cost of goods sold, how much it cost you to make the product that you were selling. So let's say you sold hamburgers and it cost you $400 for all the supplies, and you made $1,000, but it cost you $400. So you subtract out the $400 for the patties and the bread and the ketchup, and that's your gross profit, right? That's like, because you just basically passed the expense of the meat and the bread onto the customer in what they paid you. So you made $1,000 at your little food stand, but it cost you $400 to make that $1,000 in product. So that's your gross profit, your total sales minus your cost of the good that you sold. In your world, Becca, your COGS include the fabric and all that kind of stuff because you're selling purses and bags. Other people sell other things, right? So you have your gross profit. So you've subtracted one thing, your total sales, and you subtracted your first thing, which is what it cost you to make the product. Then the second thing you subtract is all of the other expenses to run your business, right? So this is like your internet bill, or your employees, or whatever other things cost you money to get it into the customer's hands. And so let's say it cost me another $300 after my bread and my meat for my hamburgers cost me an extra $300 for my part-time employee to help me get those out, and I had to put it on little paper trays, and I had to pay for some natural gas to run my stove. And so now I've got $400 in costs that I subtracted out, and another $300 in expenses. So all said and done, it really cost me $700 to make $1,000. So that difference, that $1,000 minus $700, that $300 would be my net profit. And so that's what the money you're really making. Now, where this gets silly or sticky, I run into this all the time. I've been doing this 18 years, and invariably I find that business owners aren't paying themselves. So they're real excited to talk about their profit, and I say, so you're paying yourself? And they go, no. Like, okay, so you're making money, but you have this really overworked free employee called yourself. And Becca, I know you've had a few years of the overworked, underpaid business owner. And so sometimes you're you're sort of deceiving yourself that you're making a profit. I mean, you are making a profit, but you're not including the expense of this free employee. That's you and maybe your spouse and your sister and your mom and your kids that are helping. I had one customer who was telling me how much profit she made, a large business, multi-million-dollar business. And I just said, this seems like there's too much money. I got to be honest. It seems like too much money. Talk to me about your staff. And she's like, oh, my staff is my whole family and none of them get paid. And I said, well, you have a very gracious family. However, it's not really reflective as to how profitable your business is, because if one of them got sick or died or moved, you'd have to pay somebody else to take their spot. And so there's sort of a hidden expense in your business. But your net income or your income statement basically says how much money you're making, subtract how much it costs you for the product that you're selling, and subtract the other expenses, and what's left is your profit.
Perfect. And that's what you need to look at monthly. And the thing is, too, if you can approach it like in this non-judgmental, non-editing, non-anything mode and just be like, okay, here's the truth. And what I like about it is when you do learn to go line by line, I can go, why do we spend so much on shipping? And then my staff can kindly remind me, Becca, you want to do new stickers every single month. Like, oh, I love the stickers. And they're like, yeah, okay, but it adds $7 to the box. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, it's just really interesting when you can get to know the big numbers like Clint is talking about, then break it down even further line by line, especially within your COGS, which we'll also talk about in part 2, is you just have so much more power to make decisions that will be profitable, which is ultimately what you're going for. It doesn't have to be like if you have some money issues or whatever, like, profit is a dirty word. Not necessarily. It just means you're sustaining your business. You're doing what you love. You do need to look at the numbers.
Yeah, I find that it kind of matters. I guess I have 2 thoughts. I'd want to know what it is as a percent and that percent over time. So let's say, Becca, we were looking at your business and you said my shipping, right, my packaging is costing, I don't know your numbers. And let's say that it's 4% of the total cost of what you're selling to your customer. And then the next month it's 3%, and the next month it's 2%, and the next month it's 7%. Then I could ask you, how come this is changing? How come this is fluctuating? This feels like a big difference month to month, because in this column it was January, and this is February, then March, April, May, and then I see that like the percent is changing over time, or your percent of labor, right? How much money you're making, but how much of that's going to employees, that's really fluctuating. You kind of don't want those numbers to fluctuate a whole lot, and this is why you would track it every month so that you can compare month to month. And I have a simple, in the notes I sent you, Becca, I have a simple template they can use that's free online from the organization Score that would allow them to just plug in their own numbers, or if they're using an accounting software, it already does this for them. Or if you're paying an accountant or bookkeeper, they can report just by emailing them. They can just push one button and send it back. Awesome. But it feels like, Becca, it gets emotional if I'm just real straight with your listeners. The reason people don't look at this is they're afraid of what the numbers are going to tell them. And they're afraid that the numbers are going to be honest and say that they're not making any money, that they're working this hard for nothing. If I'm just like, cut to the chase, this is why people don't look at their numbers, is fear. It's not because they're too stupid to do it at all. I've never in 18 years met anybody who's too dumb to read their own numbers, ever. Not even close.
Interesting.
It's just that it's super honest. It's similar. It's not the same, but it's similar to someone who doesn't want to get on the scale and see how much they weigh. They don't want to have their blood work done. They don't want to take their heart, their pulse, and their blood pressure because the numbers are the numbers. I find that if you can get past that hurdle, which is a really rough one, but it's an important one, then it's empowering because you can learn how to change it. And I saw that transformation in you, Becca. Years ago, you weren't looking at your numbers.
No.
And it was a rough little valley of shadow of death for you to just be okay with like your numbers. And now that you know your numbers, you're really empowered by it. You make a lot of really wise decisions that aren't only numbers based, but they are informed by your numbers.
Yeah. I kind of equate it, too, to the once I knew, yes, it was uncomfortable, but first of all, being uncomfortable means growth 9 times out of 10. So every time I feel that, I'm like, ugh, super uncomfortable, that does mean I'm growing. But I thought it would box me in, and it did the opposite. It allowed me so much freedom in design because I knew what decisions I could make that were profitable and what ones weren't. So I stopped pursuing the passy clip and started pursuing a brand new style that would gross whatever. So while I would keep it in the back of your mind while you're really uncomfortable, remind yourself that, okay, this means growth. And what kind of amazing decisions can I make after this, knowing the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay.
I like it, and I think that it's worth learning. And I would encourage anybody who takes a first run at it and they're confused or overwhelmed, take a second run, take a third run, and find
100%.
somebody who can explain it to you in a way that maps to how you understand your business.
True.
And the most important piece of it, I think, is once you get the report, know how you can change the numbers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
If you want more profit, ask somebody to teach you how to make more profit. If you want to have less expenses, ask for help on how to have less expenses so that you're in charge of your numbers.
Yes, 100%. Oh, it'll be so good. Okay, so point number 2, report number 2 to run is the balance sheet.
Yeah, this is sort of, this one's more boring. I got to be honest with you. Like, unless you're a banker or an investor, this one isn't as exciting because it's sort of a bigger picture of just like overall health of the business. And it basically is saying, what's your business worth? It's a little bit different than how much money are you making right now. So the last one we talked about is sort of like taking your pulse. It's like, what's going on right now? What's your blood pressure right now? The balance sheet is more like a blood panel, right? Where they take a bunch of numbers and they say, overall, you're pretty healthy to be 41 years old or whatever. Your balance sheet is typically what the banker looks at first or an investor looks at first. And it's talking about liabilities and equities or assets. So basically, like, do you have debt? Do you have negatives and do you have positives? And how are you managing those? And it's less exciting to read, but it does give you a sense of sort of the value of your business over time. And, you know, if you ever want to sell your business, one way that I sort of have learned to play the game is, if I had to sell my business right now, is it worth anything? And if not, how do I make it worth something, or how do I make it worth more? This is the report I would go to see how I'm doing on that. And so this is also a report that will just spit out of your software. Your balance sheet is available anytime in your accounting software, or we have a little template that we could send you a link to, where you can fill in the numbers. So it talks about your short-term liabilities. Liabilities is debt, basically. This would mean, like, did your brother loan you money for the business? Do you have a credit card? Do you run the business on? That sort of thing. And it also talks about your assets. Your assets would be like, do you have cash? Do you have inventory? And when it's all said and done, is it worth something? It's not that if you're a homeowner, you already sort of understand this, and you're paying down a mortgage, but the house is also there. It really exists, but you're transferring more of the wealth to you from the bank. And so I find this is a good one to see, like, overall, how am I managing my debt? And there are ratios here, and what you'll find is that this is the one the bankers want to see. When you go get a business loan, they're going to want to see your balance sheet. So you need to learn it before you go ask them. Otherwise, you don't know what they're telling you. But they're trying to see how do you manage your debt, and how much of your business is in debt. You know, how much of the money that you're playing with do you have control of, or is it just because you have racked up a ton of debt? And what are those percentages? And
let's use your same example that you've used with the hamburger place here. What would be like some of their liabilities and their owner's equity in that? So they would have equipment for making hamburgers, probably.
Yeah. So let's just say they bought a used grill for $500.
Okay.
And they put it on a credit card. Super normal thing for a business owner to do, right? They found a good deal. They credit carded it, so they have $500 in debt.
Okay.
Right? And then it should be, because it's a balance sheet, it's supposed to balance out. So it should be that you also then have a $500 asset sitting somewhere. So they would say, okay, well, the grill, you know how things depreciate, how you buy a new car and it's worth less? Like you couldn't just turn around and sell it for the same amount of money. So let's say that now the grill, you paid $500 for it, but now it's worth $400 because it's double used. You bought it used, now you're using it.
Okay.
But you have $100 in the till. So you have $500 in debt and a $400 grill on hand, and you have $100 in cash in the till. Your balance sheet balances out $500 in debt, $500 in assets. The balance sheet always has to balance out. And it would make more sense once you're looking at one. But that's sort of how it works for everybody, that they have the assets and liabilities of the business. And
that is reviewed probably quarterly.
Yeah, it'll spit out monthly. If you do just like generic monthly reports, it'll spit out. And again, you're sort of looking at it over time. So I would be more concerned with what's going on over time. You know, if just like your weight, if you got on the scale and you weighed however much you weighed, 100 pounds, let's say, maybe you're a middle schooler or a small adult, you weighed 100 pounds. Is that good or bad? I don't know. I mean, who knows if the 100 pounds is too much. But if the next month you weighed 150, we would say, holy buckets, there's something going on. That's just a lot of change. And so this is one of those things you kind of want to look at change over time. But the balance sheet is also something that is easy to read, and it's a really simple snapshot of what's going on in your business. And it will really matter when you ever go ask for a bank loan. And I know, Becky, your business has grown to the place where you have maybe you take out a small loan to make a purchase of equipment or inventory. The very first thing the bank's going to ask you for is your balance sheet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I love it. We have to do balance sheets all the time with our farm life as well, like all the time, you know. So I know a little bit of that, but I love the idea that it really is a snapshot of, okay, well, what's going on underneath everything else? Like let's just take a look at this.
It accounts for, it's a place like, Becca, you know, like let's say that you and your hubby put $10,000 into a business to start it, which is super common of small businesses, right? The family that starts it puts in their own money. That doesn't show up on your profit and loss statement at all. So this is that number. It's like, where do those other numbers go? Because it wasn't a January expense and it wasn't January revenue. So that number is not reflected in your profit directly. It would be harder to see. You know, you're just wondering, well, geez, we made this big loan. Our grandma loaned us some money. That number will show up on the balance sheet because then it's accounted for as a liability. Basically, it's the business admitting that it owes you the money back. And you would not see that on the profit and loss. You will see it on the balance sheet.
That's that question when in Shark Tank, when they're asking, you know, like, okay, how's the business? How are sales? Blah, blah, blah. And then they ask the question, like, how did you get the initial funds? That's what they're asking, aren't they?
That's what they went from a profit. They were talking P&L statement, and they switched over to the balance sheet because that gives the much larger picture. There's typically not numbers happening in the business financially that aren't on one of the two statements, but just profit. If your business is profitable, it doesn't reflect those other things. And again, the number of businesses, there are very generous families in the world, and I've met so many business owners that someone gave them a very generous opportunity, right? Maybe they let them use land or a building or loan them a bunch of money, and they go, my business is so profitable. And it's like, yes, but you're not paying rent for that 7,000 square foot warehouse your dad's letting you use.
Yes.
That is we need to account for that on the balance sheet so that we really have a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, because then again, you'll make more educated decisions. Like, it is not time for us to buy a building because we got this one for free. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. In the small business, it's just messier when you're small because you got money coming in different ways, and it's sort of mixed with maybe your office is in your house, and your sister helps you sometimes, and it's just a little messier than if it was much bigger.
Yeah. Okay, third report is the aging AR, which is accounts receivable. Now, to be honest, you guys, this one is a little beyond my scope, so I know Clint will break it down, only because I'm retail and I get paid up front. So tell us a little bit about the aging accounts receivable.
Yeah, this one matters a lot. Okay, so Becca, you happen to be in a business where your customers pay you first and you ship the product second. That isn't always true. For instance, right now I'm working with a company that sells medical supplies. And if a school district buys the medical supplies, they'll ship the medical supplies and send them an invoice. And then a few days, weeks, months later, the school district pays them. That time difference is, well, that's called your accounts receivable. It's basically people who owe you money. And aging basically says how long has the money been out there. This matters because effectively you're playing the role of a banker when you're not getting paid. You're financing that difference. So let's say that I sold rubber gloves for like the food service workers in a school district, right? The people who work in the kitchen. And they have those little safety gloves they make the sandwiches with for the kiddos. And they want $1,000 of them. So I send them several boxes, and they get $1,000 of. And then 30 days later, they pay me my $1,000, right? Instead of like in your world, they would have paid you up front. But in different businesses, they pay them. Then that 30 days, I'm financing. They have my gloves, and I don't have their money. So I'm the one who's covering that. I'm floating that financially. Now, I might need that $1,000 to run my business because I got employees to pay, but I can't pay them because my customer has my gloves and the money. Oh. That 30 days is a time where I'm playing the banker. I'm still having to pay my internet. I'm still having to pay taxes. I'm still having to pay my employees, but I can't because they have the money. So I'm having to come up with that money some other way, a credit card, other cash I've got on hand. So that time is the time that you're playing the banker. And I had a good friend who was a banker when I first started my business, and one of the first things he said to me was, don't have high accounts receivable because you're not in the banking industry. You're in the video production industry. Don't play the role of a banker when you're not a banker. Mm-hmm. You're too small to be having all that money out, right? The product out is your money out. And I find a lot of small businesses, this really matters because they have so much product out and the cash hasn't come back in yet, but they still have to pay the expenses of the business today with the cash. They would be paying those bills with that cash had they received it. Okay. And that's a big deal. So a lot of service industries, they send the bill at the end of the month, or people in manufacturing, like in our region, people like might manufacture some sort of like fencing or watering tanks for cattle or some farm implement. They'll send the product and get paid on the back end. And so the time delay, how old your accounts receivable are, is a health metric. And so typically you want it under 30 days. Some businesses, their aging accounts receivable is 110 days. 110 days for someone to have your product and you not have the money is a very long time.
That's insane.
In a business. In farm world, you can have a lot of money out and the money doesn't come back in. In farming, you might have put seed in the ground and paid for fuel, and you're spending, and you don't get paid to the end of the season when you sell the commodity. Yeah, that's time when you're financing it all. Mm-hmm. And so this is an important one for those people who get paid after they do the service, not before they do the service.
And this really should be run weekly so that you can be proactive about it. Like, oh, wait, that one, I just had the same gal not pay last week. We need to get a hold of them.
Yeah, you do kind of have to have a gear or find someone in your life who has a gear to just get this taken care of. If you're really empathetic and you're just like, someone's like, oh, I can't pay you today because this and that happened, there's a place and time to be gracious. Yeah. Right? There's a distinct place in life for that. But it can also be abused. And so I find that great accountants or bookkeepers or someone on staff who's really good at this has a great way of handling someone saying, hey, it's been 37 days. We need you to take care of your accounts receivable and get that paid. And it can be a lot of money.
Is there ways that you can, soften this blow? So like businesses require half down and half on completion.
Yes. So one clever way is exactly what you're talking about. Businesses will say, typically if someone makes you make a down payment, right, they say like a deposit or they say pay half up front. What they're asking you to pay for is their cost of goods sold. They're asking you to cover their butt for the actual product you received, and then they're hoping you pay them the second half to pay for all their employees and all their taxes and all their internet bills and all their expenses. Just comes in that second half. And so you got to really understand what they're asking there because they're nervous. You're taking the product and then not paying them. So yeah, if you provide a service where you don't get paid up front, you might consider taking a partial payment up front just so that you're covered so that you can keep running your business on the cash, because the cash you have in your checking account effectively is the cash you have to run your business, to buy the next order, to do the next thing. You know, in your world, Becca, the cash on hand really matters because you might have to buy a bunch of leather. Absolutely. Or you might have to travel to a show. Mm-hmm. And those can cost a lot of money. And all of a sudden that money's got to come from somewhere.
Yep.
So you have to have your customers pay you so that you have it's working capital, right? It's the cash that's kind of keeping the engine running in your business. Yep. And if you don't have it, you can't do it.
Well, and I even require for my business in particular, like when they do a design your own purse, they still pay for that up front. So if I'm at a show and she picks out her purse, she's like, well, do I pay you when I get it? And I know because I've been studying, nope, you pay for it now. Also because they're in that zone. I'm buying this, I'm ordering this bag, I pay for it now, I get to enjoy it in 4 weeks or whatever your time frame is. It's honestly, it's a mindset thing too as well. It's like they're like, okay, good, the exchange has been made, we've shook on it, the money has been exchanged, now I just get to enjoy it. But I found like if I do wait 4 weeks, even with friends and family, where I'm like, don't worry about it, we'll figure it out once you get it. There was this like period of buyer's remorse, no matter if they spent $5 or they spent $300, and they've had this period of time where they haven't paid. It just doesn't go near as smoothly. Every time I'm like, yep, money up front. It's just smoother. If you're allowed that. Like obviously, you know, some of these industries and service industries can't do that. But if you are in retail, you guys, do it up front. I don't care if they're ordering or not, do it up front.
Yeah, you really do need it up front. Yeah, and unless you just have a lot of cash on hand and you can finance your business, you know, if your customers pay you or not for a long time, which would seem strange for a small business.
Yeah.
You do need them to pay their accounts receivable on time or at the time of service. And there are you might have a listener who, let's say their family's in trucking and they truck stuff around. Well, that's not how it works in the trucking world. You pay after the fact. In which case, you just need to be good about your accounts receivable because it is the money you have to run your business. It's your money. Somebody else has it, and you're still trying to run your business while it's in someone else's pocket. That's a hard thing to do.
Yes. Oh, that's a great way of putting it. Okay, so report number 4 is cash flow. Tell us about cash flow. It seems pretty, what would be the word? Duh. That's the only word that comes to mind. But tell us about cash flow.
Yeah, cash flow is basically is what it's called, right? Which is like how your money's moving in and out. Think of the tides in the ocean. Okay. The waves come in and go out, and they come in and go out. They come in and go out. And so that you want to know what's happening. And that's typically small businesses are having a cash flow problem. In fact, it's safer for me to assume as an advisor when I go to small businesses that they are having a cash flow problem than they aren't, because almost invariably they are. Mm-hmm. And so one way to look at this is you sort of say, like, let's say I started the month with so much money in checking. Let's say I started the month with $100 in my checking account, beginning cash balance. That's easy to do. You can pull your banking report or just go look in your piggy bank how much money's in there at the beginning of the month, right? And then let's go back to our hamburger stand example. Let's say we had $100 in checking, not in our cash register, just in our business checking account that we deposit our money at the end of the week or whatever. Then we made $1,000 and we spent our $700 to make the burgers. And so we ended up with $300 we stuck back in there. And so we begin the next month with $400, right? We started with 100 and now we ended with 400. That picture, that sort of from beginning balance to ending balance, is your cash flow. You start the month with how much money, you end the month with how much money, like the waves in the ocean coming in and going out, and you kind of see where your money's moving around in your cash flow. And what happens often, and it's tied to accounts receivable often, is that money's going out faster than it's coming in or at the wrong times. Like you have really big payments going out for big purchases and really small amounts of money coming in for small customer transactions. And so you have a cash flow problem. So, Becca, let's go over to your world. And these are not Becca's numbers because I don't see Becca's numbers. So I have no idea if these numbers are right. But let's say that Becca has, let's say the average bag is, let's say people are buying $100 bags. Becca has a new bag line and it's $100.
Okay.
For whatever reason. And I'm just doing this for round numbers so I can do the math on the podcast. It's a $100 bag. And every once in a while someone buys a $100 bag. But then Becca has to buy $5,000 in leather. Well, those little $100 payments coming in are not coming in fast enough to make the $5,000 purchase. And so you see where you could have a cash flow problem. The money coming in isn't coming in fast enough to deal with the money going out in that instance. That's a cash flow issue. And if people don't, it gets messy, especially when you're using a credit card and you're paying in delay and you have customers paying in delay and the money's coming in at all sort of weird moments. It gets really confusing as to whether or not you're making any money. And again, that's the challenge. I just was working with a business in another state, and they have very high cash flow, meaning like there's a lot of money coming in, a lot of money going out, and they're not tracking it well. And so they also can't tell if they're making any money or if it's coming in and going out at the right rate. And so this is one of those one of the ones where you go, something's wrong here. And this is what they tell me. A small business owner goes, something's off. I don't get it. We have so many customers, right?
Yes.
We have so many customers. We have high sales. They're trucking in. But, like, I still can't pay this bill.
Okay.
I still can't. I never get enough money in a checking account to make a payment on this transaction. Or I'm trying to save up for this piece of equipment. I can't. And I don't understand because money's coming in all the time and it's going out all the time, but the cash flow is moving too quickly to see. You can run a cash flow statement or a cash flow report that'll explain that to you.
Okay. So what is an example of what they could do if they find out, okay, the cash flow is shot, so to say? Like, do they time it to order the supplies earlier in the month? Or, like, what are some of the problem solving they can do when they know
it
their
could be
cash
they're not profitable. The number one thing is they're not profitable.
Okay.
And I'm going to pick on you, Becca. You have had a product, in my memory, where it cost you more to make it than you were selling it for.
Yes, that was my big aha, too.
The most generous, nice bag maker in America. Becca was spending more money making the product than she was charging you guys. Now, that's great, but that doesn't, I don't know if you know this, but Becca has 4 children and a beautiful husband and a farm to run. She has to make money somewhere. And so we said, Becca, that's not sustainable. You can't do that. So that was one of the things you might, if you're profitable, you should end up with more money.
Yep.
It also is a sense of like how well you manage that money.
Yeah.
And this comes in when you need to buy inventory.
Yes.
You, Becca, have to be sort of piling up money to make inventory purchases. Because you'll buy a bunch of fabric, a bunch of leather, a bunch of zippers, a bunch of buttons, a bunch of snaps. And then all of a sudden that huge chunk of money went out of your checking. Just, you wrote this huge check and your checking account went way down. But you still have to run the business on the remaining money. Those big waves of cash in and out, you have to be good at playing that game so that you can make those purchases.
Yep.
And your cash flow statement's going to help you see that.
And when you get really good at the cash flow game, so to say, like them going, I had 2 products that I literally lost money on. I'm like, whoops, okay. And it did take a while to recover because they were used to paying a certain price for this small purse. But then I would make profits. I could make better decisions. But here's the cash flow thing that I thought was fascinating is I created something at the beginning of the month because A, it was payroll, and B, that's when I always needed to refill hardware, leather, fabric, whatever. So I created this exclusive product that only debuted in the first week of the month, and hey, solve some cash flow problems. So when you know your cash flow and you're pulling this report and you're looking at it, you can make more strategic decisions because it doesn't always have to be like you're going to have to close the business. Not necessarily. How can you get creative?
I think for, being in the 2021 world in the United States and most people just making enough to live and survive, their cash flow matters. When they get their paycheck from their boss and when their bills come in really matter. And if you've ever had a time where a bill has come due and, I had a medical bill come in that I forgot about because they send it so far after I had a bicycle accident 10 months ago and then I just got a medical bill. You're just like, oh my gosh, my cash flow this month isn't going to support that.
Right.
Like that was so far ago. Well, that's a cash flow issue. I don't have enough money coming in every day and, the going out, what's left isn't enough to cover that. So I have to get creative about how to pay that. That's when you start to experience that cash flow. And when your business depends on the money going out and coming in and you being able to pay those things for the good opportunities, like Becca, when a trade show comes in and you need to get a better booth and you got to buy right away, you do need that cash on hand, but spending that money means you're not using it someplace else in your business. That's a cash flow issue and decision.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, it's a good one. It's a good one. Okay, last report for part 1 here is the revenue by customer.
Yeah. This I find that I don't know that I've ever had a customer who knew this off the top of their head or was running this report at the beginning.
Good, me neither. I was like, what is this?
Yeah. You might know this by name, but you don't know it by number. And that's basically like, let's rank your customers based on who's giving you the most money down to who's paying the least, either in type of customer or in actual names. Now, some small businesses really know their customers and they'll know like, oh, Sarah's our top customer. She buys $1,000 a month or whatever. Okay. That's important to know.
Yes.
It can be really illuminating. But I have another client who has a decent sized business, and I ran this report, revenue by customer. Let me just see. And I didn't know any of these people's names, right? Because they were just reports. Sure. So we ran a sales report, and in his website would do this because he does his sales on the website, and it just went from the person who's bought the most product down to the least. And you have a lot of customers, thousands. So I just picked the top 10. I said, I'm going to call your top 10 customers, and I'm going to thank them for being a top 10 customer. And I'm going to find out who they are. And so we did this. It was a simple idea, right? Like, let's just see who the biggest customers are because they're paying for a disproportionate amount of his business. Okay. Right, Becca, you might have some super customers who percentage-wise are a big deal. When they buy, if they went away, you would feel it. Mm-hmm. You have built a good relationship with them over the years, and they buy from you continually. And you'd like to find more of them, right, Becca? If you imagined your top customer, and if that person could bring on 2 or 3 more people like them, that would be a big deal because it might generate a lot of revenue for the business. And so I called them. Very unexpected. I've done this twice in the last 2 years. One time for one customer, one of my customers, we called their customers. Every single one of the top 10 customers was a widowed woman in their 70s. Now, there is not a report in the world that he could have pulled to guess that we were serving widowed grandmothers.
Oh, my God.
Never. We were flabbergasted. Because he didn't know how old his customers were buying the product. He was just selling the product. The email address comes through with the name. He's not making any judgment calls based on their email or name. He's never asking them their age.
Right.
Well, that transformed our marketing. Because we were, oh, my gosh, we're actually selling to grandmothers. It never dawned on us it was to an older demographic. And they weren't grandmothers because they were old. I asked all of them if they, their family situation. Sure. Every single one of them was a grandmother. And they were in their 70s. That was illuminating.
Oh, I'm sure.
2, another one of the businesses I worked with, we found out that all of her top 10 customers were dog lovers and had tattoos. Now, how in the world, if you're a website person, a web commerce, e-commerce retailer, how would you ever know that your customers are dog people and have tattoos? Right. And guess what we started including in their marketing photos? Tattooed customers. Models. And mentioning stuff about dog lovers and dog days and doggy shopping. And guess what? Her customers loved it. So understanding who they are is important to you because they are an important part of your business. and it might illuminate your marketing. Now, in a much larger business, it could be you're running this report because too much of your sales is going to one customer, and if you lost them, you might have to close your business.
Yes, yeah.
And that could be really dangerous. And now, I'll tell you, I'm working with local growers, local food producers in the southeastern South Dakota right now, and Costco will buy locally produced produce, but Costco refuses to be more than 25% of your revenue because they don't want you to solely depend on them for your success. They need you to be successful enough that if Costco didn't buy from you 1 month, you wouldn't just close. Now, that's really wise on the Costco end of it. In a small business, it protects you because you didn't land an account that's so big that if you lost it, you'd have to close your doors. That would be something you would know by looking at your revenue by customer.
Yeah.
You have too many eggs in one basket.
That's the thing. You have to evaluate whether you're retail or I think this would probably be, well, like you just explained, though, it could be for both. Retail, knowing who your customers are so you can have your marketing match up more clearly to who they are, seeking the right audiences. But then also for service industries, knowing that not all of your eggs are in one basket, and this customer, even if it's a national pandemic or whatever, goes down, and that's 70% of your income, but you weren't looking at it, you'd be in big trouble. Like you have to, that is fascinating. I love that you had two awesome examples. Okay, encouragers, if you notice that I was a little bit quiet, it's because I was recording notes as quickly as Clint was saying it, because I'm always educated when I go back and revisit these numbers as well. I do have to review mine monthly, quarterly, weekly. I get really fun and nitty-gritty, especially when I'm with Lauren, Clint's partner. Then I get to look at, like, daily what's going on. And so I really encourage you. I know that this is meaty stuff. You need to do it. Right? You want to be a successful person. You set out to do this. This is your calling. This is your mission, whatever it might be. You got to know the numbers because then you can make wiser decisions. Remember, when you know your budget, then you get to freely spend better on what you want, right? Because you know how much is there, and then you don't have the stress of it. Same thing here. When you know the numbers, you can make better decisions. Hopefully, and at least in my case, I get to make more creative decisions. So stay tuned for part 2 when we talk about inventory forecast and COGS, a deeper dive into the COGS. Until next time, encouragers, we got this.
I know how you can start executing on all the things that God has equipped you to do. You can pick up my book at theencouragerpodcast.com and check out the store complete with book, journal, and the master course. Also, make sure to check out the resources tab where you'll get a hold of all the PDFs from the podcast. Thank you for tuning in, encouragers. Remember to subscribe so it's automatically on your phone. And please rate and review me. We got this, encouragers.